of course, a keynote speaker, no other than Mr. EksAyn Anderson. Welcome, Mr. EksAyn on Mental Health 101. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for having me on the show. Well, and I'm grateful to be here. I think I know a few things about this, but I got to say I'm not a mental health counselor. I'm not a mental health professional, but there's some things that I feel like I've learned that might be helpful to some, and I appreciate you having
Yes,
me on the show.
definitely, Mr. EksAyn Anderson. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with the world. What does mental health awareness mean to you personally?
Well, I think let me tell you this. A lot of times people talk about mental health, but I think one of the key things that we need to remember is that we cannot disconnect our mental health from our conscience. Okay, so let me tell you what I mean. When we're not true to our conscience, which is that sense in our head of what's right and wrong, and I think everybody in the whole world, no matter what culture you're from or where you're from or where you're from or even what religion or what nationality, everybody has this sense of what's right and wrong. And when we're not true to that, we're at war with ourselves. And so rather than fixing what we need to, which is inside ourselves, a lot of times we take that war out on others, and we do it when we find what's wrong with other people. And that just makes our problems worse. And so when we're talking about mental health, I think one of the things that's super, super important is that we have to make sure we connect it to what we know is right and wrong in our head. I mean, and if we don't do that, then we're really at war with ourselves, and that's where things can go downhill quickly. So it's a good question. Thanks for asking, Daniel.
No worries, Mr. EksAyn, and very well said. Very well said. So, can you share a personal experience where awareness about mental health help you or someone else or someone close to you?
Well, that's a great question. So again, I can tell you, let's talk about myself here for an example. Like, I know when I've made choices that are not in alignment with my conscience, there's no way for me to feel good about those choices. In other words, when we go against our conscience, we're at war with ourselves. And so, like I said at the beginning, we've got to be willing to listen to the part of us that knows what's right, knows what's wrong. And yes, there is a real right and wrong. And when we align with those things, we feel better about ourselves. Now, let me just tell you this. We talked a little bit about this on another podcast, but we talked about how principles govern the consequences of our choices. So what we've really got to do, in my view, to have good mental health is we've got to be able to figure out what's really, really real. And I'm going to talk about this again. Gravity is really, really real. It's real whether you believe it is or not. Now, how could you align with gravity to, say, make you money? You could build a hydroelectric dam. You could build a ski resort. You could build a skydiving company. Or gravity could injure you if you're not respecting it, and it could fall off a cliff. So gravity is this scientific principle that's really, really real. I can either align with it and respect it, maybe make a lot of money, or I could fall off a cliff and be injured, maybe even die. And so gravity is bigger than you. It's bigger than me, Daniel. And if we can learn about it, we can use it to our advantage. But if we just ignore it, we can fall off a cliff. And so one of the things that's helped me when you ask about mental health is to say, okay, there are things out there in relationships. There are principles out there in relationships. There are principles out there in life. There are principles out there that are just as real as gravity. And we have to figure out what they are because they control our consequences. You know what I'm saying? Can you imagine someone saying, I don't really believe in gravity and it doesn't really work for me? Well, That's just not true. Gravity is really, really real, whether you believe it is or not. And so when we're talking about mental health, we've got to figure out what are the principles that govern mental health? What are the principles that govern our relationships? What are the principles? And then align with them. And if we can do that, and I found that happening in my own life, when I found what those principles are and I align with them, then I have better results from a mental health perspective because they're real. They're bigger than me. They're bigger than you. And we've got to figure out what they are. What are the principles that are as real as gravity? So great question, Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. EksAyn. And in your opinion, why discussing mental health openly important?
Why is it important?
Yes.
Well, it's a great question. When we take care of our own mental health, which we do by aligning with real principles and following our conscience, we're then able to serve and help others more. When we neglect taking care of those things that are, when we ignore principles, or we ignore the things that are bigger than us, like the golden rule, like honesty, like our conscience, we end up not feeling good about ourselves. And oftentimes that comes out later in unhelpful situations. It comes out in anger, it comes out in other ways. And so being willing to say, okay, I need to figure out what the principles are and align with them is super, super helpful so that we can serve and help others and have a great impact on the world.
Certainly. Very well said, Mr. EksAyn. So, have your views on mental health changed over time? And if so, how?
Well, I would say they've become strengthened. And I want to give you an example. Okay. So we talked about gravity. Gravity, Daniel, is really, really real. It's real whether you believe it is or not.
Yes.
And can you imagine someone saying, I don't really believe in gravity? Like we talked about, it doesn't work. Gravity is real. Well, what are the principles that are as real as gravity that are going to help us live good lives? Well, one of the ones I believe is the golden rule. We treat people like we want to be treated. Now, if you're ignoring this, it's the equivalent of ignoring gravity. You could be injured. You might even die if you ignore gravity. But if you align with gravity, it's the equivalent of, or if you align with the golden rule, it's the equivalent of aligning with gravity, which is like you could build a hydroelectric dam or a ski resort or something that uses gravity that makes people lots of money. So when I treat people a certain way, okay, so if I go and I start treating people in a way that doesn't align with the golden rule, then I'm going to start to feel bad about myself. If I'm treating people that aligns the way with the good golden rule, I start to feel better about myself. And because the golden rule is bigger than me, it's bigger than you, it's bigger than anybody who's listening, we have to respect it. It's as big as gravity. I've got to treat people like I want to be treated. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes we don't feel like it. Sometimes we feel like being angry. We feel like saying the harsh thing. But one of the keys to mental health, in my view, that's been strengthened is if we can make those little decisions, then we can, that align with principle, our mental health is stronger. It's better. And so my views on that have strengthened over time. I wouldn't say they've changed. I feel like as I've gone further, I feel like my views about the need to follow principles has strengthened. Great question.
Mr. EksAyn, what strategies do you personally use to maintain good mental health?
Great question, Daniel. And it's kind of like what we just talked about right here. It's what we've got to do. The strategies are less important than the principle. Let me tell you what I mean. If I want to have good relationships, and so I'm feeling like I don't have good relationships, but I'm ignoring the golden rule.
Yes.
It's like ignoring gravity. It isn't going to work. Now, here's the problem. Here's a strategy that you can use for mental health, okay? Because people, a lot of times in mental health, I think, are so keyed into how do you feel? How do you feel? How do you feel? And I think that sometimes is the wrong question. I think we can take our temperature too long and be too concerned about how we feel. Let me give you an example, okay?
Yes.
There
Go
was
ahead,
a gentleman who came up to Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey is a man who wrote the book, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he did it decades ago. But this gentleman came up to Stephen Covey, and I hope I'm telling the story correctly, but he said something like this. He said, "I don't love my wife anymore." And that kind of surprised Stephen Covey. And he looked at the guy and he said, "Well, then love her." And the guy said something like this. He said, "I told you, I've fallen out of love with her. She's fallen out of love with me. We have 3 kids. We're probably heading for a divorce," or something similar to that. I'm probably getting the exact words off. But he said something like, "I've fallen out of love with my wife. How do you love someone you don't love?" And Stephen Covey looked at the guy and said, "My friend, you're acting like love is a feeling. Love isn't a feeling. Love's an action word. It's a verb. It's something you do. But here's the kicker. Here's the point. If you do the verb, the feeling will follow." And this is important in mental health, in my opinion, okay? We can lead our feelings. In other words, if you think that what you're feeling is just coming from the universe out there and it just makes you feel a certain way and you're a victim of this something out there that's doing it to you, that thought itself, Daniel, is the problem. And so what we need to do is be able to say, look, if I'm feeling a certain way, I can lead my feelings. Now, there's more than one way to do that. You ask what the strategies are. Number one, if I'm not feeling love for someone else, I can still choose to act loving towards that person. In other words, in this situation where this gentleman said, "I've fallen out of love with my wife," maybe instead of running to go get a divorce, it could be, "I'm going to go do the dishes or serve her or give her a back rub or do something to lead my feelings." Now, it doesn't happen right off, but you can lead your feelings with action. Okay. And that's a truth that a lot of people don't realize. A lot of people just say, "Well, I'm feeling bad. Something out there is doing it to me." And Stephen Covey also said this. He said, when we think that the problem is out there, that thought itself is the problem. And so here's what I'd like to say, Daniel, in your question here. Any problem that we have, and these are the strategies I'm going to tell you here. You either have 100% control over it, we have some control over it, or we have 0 control over it. So if it's something that has to do with my behavior, I have 100% control over that. If it has something to do with a relationship, other people's behavior, I don't have 100% control over that. In category 2, I've only got some influence, some control. And in category 3, like things like the weather or things like my past, I don't have any control. But every single one of our problems, including mental health problems, including everything that we deal with, falls into one of those problems, one of those categories. I either have 100% influence, 100% control over it, or have some influence, some control over it, or I have 0 control or 0 influence over it. But we've got to find answers, strategies, as you said, Daniel, to fix these problems. And I think as we think about this, we'll find there's 2 words that will help us as we solve these problems. And here they are. I'm going to say them slowly. Change yourself. We've got to change ourselves. So if it's something that I'm doing wrong, my behavior, my attitude, my thinking, I've got to change myself. If it's in a relationship, now this is where people get hung up. They say, "Well, it's not my fault. It's their fault. It's my spouse's fault, or it's my child's fault. It's my boss's fault." And people don't understand that the answer still is to change yourself. And why? Why should we change ourselves? Well, because if our methods of helping this problem had worked, we wouldn't have the problem. So in a relationship problem, we can change our approach. We can change what we're doing. Okay. And the last things are things we have 0 control over. Like, Daniel, let me explain. I can't even I have 0 control over the past. Even what I said to you 5 seconds ago, I can't change it. I can't change the weather. I can't change the stock market. There's lots of things I have 0 control over. But in that situation, I can change my attitude. So here's the thing. In any problem you have, whether it's a category 1, stuff you have 100% control over or influence over, category 2, stuff you have some influence over, or category 3, stuff you have 0 influence over. The answer is to change yourself. Categories 1's easy. Category 2, I change my approach in my relationships. I change my approach. In category 3, I can change my attitude. All of them involve changing me. So here's the thing. If you think the problem is out there, that thought itself is the problem, according to Stephen Covey, and I believe it. And so these strategies in our heads that we've got to work on us. If I want my world to change, Instead of trying to change someone else, instead of trying to change my spouse or that person, I've got to start with me. And as I start with me, my ability to influence other people increases. But I've got to start with me. Great question.
With me. Very well said, Mr. EksAyn. Very well said. So what common misconceptions about mental health would you like to correct?
Well, I think there's this big focus on people's feelings all the time. And so people say, well, how do you feel? How do you feel? How do you feel? You should make your decisions on feelings. And I disagree with that. I disagree with the common thing that we should follow our feelings. Here's the problem. Our feelings are kind of like the weather. They go back and forth. We could be angry and then we could be regretful and then we can be happy again, and if you follow your feelings and just do what your feelings tell you to do, you're going to end up having really fickle results. And I think sometimes in mental health, we focus too much on how do I feel? How do I feel? How do I feel? Well, let me give you an example. It's kind of back to this idea that we can lead our feelings. I had a friend named Brody. And Brody, he did this one thing called the Spartacus workout. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the Spartacus workout, but the Spartacus workout, you work out for like an hour or so, and you do all these kinds of weird muscle things that make you really sore when you're done. And he said, I did this workout, and by the time I got done, I was so sore I could barely walk. I mean, he hated it. But he said, I committed to do it. So I did it again the next day. I still hated it. I did it again the next day. I still hated it. I did it again the next day. He goes, he still hated it. He didn't like it. But he had committed to do this workout. So he goes, I kept doing it. I kept doing it. I kept doing it. He goes, I did it for like 2.5 or 3 weeks. And then something was really interesting. He goes, something changed. I said, do you remember which day it was? He goes, I don't remember the exact day, but I remember it was right around week 2.5 or 3. He goes, I got to the end of the workout this one particular day around week 2.5 or 3. And instead of hating it, he goes, I actually felt great. In fact, I felt so great. I felt like I was just getting started and I wanted to do the workout again. So that day I did the workout twice. He goes, it happened again the next day. I got to the end of the workout. Instead of just wanting to stop, I did it again twice that day. And so you see what happened is he led his feelings, Daniel. What he did is he didn't want to work out, but he kept doing it for 2.5 or 3 weeks. And then he felt like doing it. Now, contrast that with, I'm not going to work out. I'm just going to sit here on the couch and eat junk food and potato chips until the feeling just kind of wafts in the door, right? Is that a good way? I mean, are you ever going to work out if you have to wait for the feeling to come in through the window? What we've got to realize, Daniel, is that we can lead our feelings. And I think sometimes in mental health, people are so keyed in to like, what do you feel? What do you feel? What do you feel? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't listen to your feelings sometimes. But what I am saying is make our decisions based on principle, not based on how we feel at the moment. So if I commit, let me give you one more example. If I commit to myself to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, but then I sleep until 7, I've broken my word to myself. When I break my word to myself, I just don't feel as good about myself as if I'd gotten up. Now, at 6 o'clock in the morning, I might not really feel like it. I might feel I really want to stay in and sleep in. But if I can keep my word to myself, the way I feel about myself will go up. My self-esteem, my ability to trust me. And so if we want a real strategy to try to get our mental health in gear, in my view, is make commitments and keep them. You can start small, like I'm going to get up at a certain time. I'm going to go to the gym for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is, make those commitments and keep them to yourself, because then you start to trust you. Now, that doesn't mean you do it. You don't, if you made a commitment that you're going to get up and go to the gym and you feel like sleeping in, you still got to go to the gym, even though you don't feel like it. So you got to make your decision based on the principle of keeping your commitments to yourself, rather than I'm going to just follow my feelings. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions I believe we have in mental health is it's all about feelings, all about feelings. No, it's not. It's about principles. And then you follow the principles, and then the feeling follows you as you go down this correct path. It's like the difference, Daniel, between building a hydroelectric dam and using gravity to your advantage to make millions of dollars of electricity, and maybe hanging on a cliff and feeling like you're going to fall out. It's the same gravity. If I'm aligning with gravity, it's pushing me on. It's helping me be successful. If I'm ignoring gravity, I almost feel like I'm going to fall off a cliff. And so if I keep commitments to myself, if I align with the golden rule, if I'm honest, even when it's hard, I feel better about me. And that improves my mental health. Great question. Super good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. EksAyn. So, what is one piece of advice you'd offer someone hesitant to seek mental health help?
What's one piece of advice that I would give to someone who's seeking mental health help?
Yes, hesitant to seek
Oh,
mental
who's
health help.
hesitant? Well, I'd say your hesitancy is not necessarily a bad thing. But I would say, as you decide to seek mental health help, I would say, remember that the main thing is to follow your conscience and keep commitments to yourself. And ask yourself, actually, say, am I following my conscience? And am I keeping commitments to myself? If you're doing those two things, which, by the way, all of us fall short, so you don't need to feel horrible about that. We all fall short on that. But if we can start working that direction, in my view, those are the keys. Now, you want to be picky about who you have as your mental health counselor. If you decide to go get a counselor, some counselors do a great job, and there are other counselors who may not. In my view, if a counselor is telling you that, principles don't matter and it's okay to go against your conscience and it's okay to go against principles, that's probably not a counselor you want to go with, right? So in that sense, your hesitancy may be okay. If your counselor is telling you to do things that are in accordance with the golden rule, in accordance with principles, then that may be a good counselor to go with. But really, if you think a counselor is going to solve all your problems, that's probably not true. And what I would start to do, if for anybody who is thinking about it, I'd say try to make a few commitments to yourself, small ones, make them really small, little tiny ones. Like, I'm going to be at this place at this time. I'm going to get up at a certain amount of time, even if I'm tired. I'm going to go to the gym, even if I don't feel like it. Try to make little tiny commitments to yourself and see if that doesn't start helping how you feel in your mind. Little tiny daily commitments and then do your best to honor, but don't commit unless you can. If you can't really, if you say I'm going to get up at 5 and you can't, well, don't say 5. Say I'm going to get up at 6:30. But when 6:30 comes, make sure you're going to do it. You might decide to change that later, but those little tiny self commitments are important.
Very important, people. So, Mr. EksAyn, how important do you believe it is to integrate mental health education into everyday life?
It's a good question, and it's such an interesting question because let me tell you the interesting thing, Daniel. When we're constantly worried about our own health, in other words, if I'm completely worried about me all the time, like how am I doing? How am I feeling? Why am I feeling this or why am I feeling that? What happens is it usually, or it can at some point, bog us down. One of the interesting things about, in my view, being happy is trying to focus on other people's alleviating their pain, alleviating their stuff. Now, sometimes that's hard to do if we haven't done our own. I'll give you that. But sometimes when we say, okay, I'm gonna not worry about how I'm feeling at this moment because I'm feeling something that's negative, and I'm gonna go help something. Look, buddy, let me give you an example. If you want to have a good experience, here's an idea. Maybe go to an old folks home where people are genuinely lonely. And you say, well, I might feel lonely. Go to an old folks home, be brave, walk in there and ask, can I talk to somebody who's lonely? They'll probably let you talk to them. Go in there and ask them how their day is doing. Ask them how they're going. Listen to them. try to do the same thing that you'd want to have someone do to you, even though you might be feeling lonely yourself, but be the first to do it to someone else. And here's the interesting thing, Daniel. As we do that, our own mental health gets better because we're focusing on other people and helping them, and it helps our own mental health. So again, being so focused on like, how do I fix me and how do I fix my mental health may be a little bit less helpful in many situations than just going and saying, how can I alleviate someone else's loneliness? How can I be there for the person who's sitting alone at lunch at school, or for that person who looks a little sad, or for this person at the old folks home who needs a little bit of help? Or maybe I can be there for somebody who's asking for help. Somehow get outside of yourself and help other people, and watch, even though it's difficult. This is where you got to lead your feelings, because you're like, well, I don't feel like it. I don't feel like going to help other people. Well, do it anyway. Go try to help other people. I don't feel like doing this. Do it anyway. Lead yourself. You got to go through that hard part. But as we do the hard things and we reach outside of ourselves, I believe our mental health improves. That's my view.
Beautifully articulated, Mr. EksAyn. Well said. So before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Book 101 Review, in its 5th season, People 5th season. And please do listen to my featured author of the month, Miss Marcy Pusey, award-winning and best-selling author. So please do listen, Book 101 Review, wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. EksAyn, what is your hope for the future of mental health awareness and advocacy in society?
Well, I would hope that it becomes more principle-based and less feeling-based. In other words, yes, we want to feel positive feelings, but if we're always taking our temperature about how we feel, we end up feeling worse usually. If we forget our feelings for just a little while and we do the right thing and focus on other people, and we decide to focus on what's the right thing to do in this situation, how can I align with stuff that's just as powerful as gravity, like the golden rule, like honesty and all the other things we need to. If I align with those things and I worry a little bit less about my feelings, we'll notice that our feelings improve. And so in my view, I would hope we become more focus on what's really, really real. What are the principles that govern everything? And then make our mental maps in our head align with what's really, really real. So this is a long answer, but I just want to say it. If my map in my head doesn't match up with what's really, really real, I have issues. It's like trying to navigate New York with a map of Miami. It doesn't work. But if I have the map in my head matching what's really, really real, then my chances of having positive, being able to navigate life go way up. And so what's really, really real? Well, I'll give you a hint. Principles are real. Principles like the golden rule, like being honest, like following your conscience, leading your feelings, the law of the harvest, we reap what we sow. These are real things that if we align with them, we get better results. And so, but we got to do it when it's hard to do. And that's part of the point. So I would hope that the mental health will be more principle focused, more focused on principles and less focused on how we're feeling every moment. And I think that will actually help us feel better. Interesting, as we forget our feelings for a little bit and focus on principles, we actually feel better.
Definitely, Mr. EksAyn Anderson. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world. So can you please invite our listeners to support your books as well as being a keynote speaker?
Well, certainly. And, I have written a couple books and I am a speaker. I would tell for any of those out there, I believe one of the principles that governs our results in life is we want to try our very, very best to have strong families. And so I've started a worldwide movement to help fathers at dadfluence.org. And so they're welcome to go to that. They can also follow me at on X or eksinfluence.com. Thanks, Daniel.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. EksAyn Anderson, because if you support him, more and more empowering books to come and more keynote speaking to come. So, Mr. EksAyn, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel, for having me.
More to come, people. See you soon.